Hello, everyone. I'm going to begin this presentation with a short disclaimer. So, this is a very complicated topic that was very hard to compress within the parameters of this presentation. I may be able to clarify any muddled misunderstandings at the end. It is my intention to support the claim that patriotism, blind patriotism to be specific, is bred in and intentionally perpetuated through our public educational system via whitewashed curriculum, misleading textbooks, and archaic jingoistic traditions. Here are the essential questions that I will be asking in this presentation. Number one, what does it mean to be patriotic in the United States, and how does patriotism affect a student's education? Number two, what is the intellectual integrity and overall quality of education that the majority of American students are receiving? Number three, are young American students being indoctrinated by their government in their schools? And number four, most importantly, are we truly living in a free and democratic society when it is compulsory for students to learn to worship the state at a very young age? So, patriotism is sown into our collective culture at an early age. I'm not arguing that it's bad, but that it is not the responsibility of the educational system to force it upon students. Children are taught to pledge their allegiance to the American flag, in essence, to take an oath of fidelity to fabric, beginning at an age when they do not know how to read or write, never mind comprehend the enormous responsibility that ought to accompany one's commitment to a system of government. Is that fair? Should patriotism be a byproduct of an educational system or education in itself, or should it be separated from it? Moreover, what are the long term consequences of blind patriotism to our society, our rights, and our culture? This is an excerpt from a 1964 song by folk singer Tom Paxton. It ridicules the American educational system and the falsehoods told within it. The lyrics are, "What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that Washington never told a lie. I learned that soldiers seldom die. I learned that everybody's free, and that's what the teacher said to me." Renowned historian and Boston University professor Howard Zinn had this to say about the song's accuracy in regards to our educational system. The song is amusing, an exaggeration, of course, but not too far off the mark, because all of us who grew up in the United States, as soon as we entered the first grade, were taught to have pride in our nation. Our classroom walls were decorated with photos of the founding fathers, all wise and benign, and our first heroes were military heroes: George Washington, Nathan Hale, Andrew Jackson. Even before we knew what the words meant, we were reciting in unison the Pledge of Allegiance, with liberty and justice for all. We sang the Star-Spangled Banner, ending with the words, "The land of the free and the home of the brave." Did the teacher point out that at the time of the national anthem, or when it was written, the land of the free was a country that held several million black people as slaves? Not likely, because while slavery might be mentioned at some point, it would not be juxtaposed with the words about liberty and justice. That might spoil the picture that we all had in our heads of a nation unique in its virtues, deserving of pledges and salutes and anthems. This may look like a scene taken from Berlin during the reign of the Third Reich, but it's actually a scene from a schoolyard in Connecticut, circa 1942. The children are pledging allegiance and utilizing the Bellamy salute, which was at one time a constant part of American culture. Francis Bellamy, the author of the Pledge of Allegiance, designated this salute to accompany the pledge during its recitation. The salute was replaced by the Over the Heart salute on December 22, 1942, a full year after the United States entered World War II. If the United States Congress saw fit to replace the Bellamy salute due to its resemblance to the Nazi salute, what are we to infer in regards to the original designation in relation to the pledge itself? Every American school day begins with the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. Students stand upright, at attention, with their right hand poised over their heart. The pledge has been altered 3 times in history. The first 2 alterations were minor, but the last alteration occurred during the Cold War. The words "under God" are the most jarring inclusion, as they were placed in the pledge to reinforce the notion that Americans are, collectively, God-fearing Christians. Contrastingly, the citizens of the Soviet Union were considered to be atheistic, godless, and therefore as un-American as you possibly could be. The Cold War was in its death throes when I learned to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, but the "under God" clause has nevertheless persisted. and in my ancient public educational experience, it was a compulsory act to recite it. I do not recall anyone ever opting out of doing it, myself included. I cannot say, with any true degree of accuracy, whether or not any of my elementary through high school teachers informed me or my peers that it is perfectly acceptable to opt out of reciting the pledge. However, I do recall very clearly the ridicule and discipline that we would receive from our teachers if we did anything but recite the Pledge of Allegiance. In fact, if I remember correctly, dissidence, for lack of a better term, was always met with the same old phrase: show respect. Kneeling or sitting out during the national anthem has come back into the focus of the mainstream media due to its relation to the Black Lives Matter movement and other ongoing civil rights and socio-economic movements. I have compiled here a few recent, these have been published within the last 3 months, New York Times headlines regarding high schoolers sitting out the national anthem or the Pledge of Allegiance for various reasons. The headlines and excerpts from those articles read, "High schools threaten to punish students who kneel during anthem. 2 Texas students sue schools to freely protest the pledge." The controversy over kneeling in protest of racial injustice moved beyond the world to professional sports this week when a number of schools told students they were expected to stand during the national anthem. Schools and government buildings, we are taught to believe, are places that should remain secular or without religious interference or affiliation. The hanging of the national motto, "In God We Trust," on the walls of public schools and in or on government buildings has, therefore, been a point of contention for many years. Proponents to have the motto removed from schools and government buildings and grounds, myself included, have cited that the First Amendment of the Constitution, which in essence states that public school teachers, principals, administrators, and other personnel may not promote a particular religion as being superior to any other, promote religion in general as superior to a secular approach to life, be antagonistic to religion in general or to a particular religious belief in particular, be antagonistic to secularism, or do things to advance or inhibit religion. In July of 2017, the Colorado Board of Education passed, by a vote of 5-1, a non-binding resolution to encourage appropriate display in schools and other public buildings of the national motto. Supporters see such postings as an opportunity to give children a moral compass. Opponents say they are a veiled attempt to introduce religion and prayer in school and violate the U.S. Constitution. All of this begs the question, what are we learning in school? The textbooks that students use, no matter where they live in the United States, were most likely written under Texas influence if they graduated with a reflexive suspicion of the concept of separation of church and state and an unexpected interest in the contributions of the National Rifle Association to American history. You probably know who to blame. A Texas high school student and his mother recently called attention to a curious line in a geography textbook regarding a description of the Atlantic slave trade as bringing, quote-unquote, millions of workers to plantations in the American South. McGraw-Hill Education, the publisher of the textbook, has since acknowledged that the term workers was a misnomer. You think? After 3 days of turbulent meetings, the Texas Board of Education on Friday approved a social studies curriculum that will put a conservative stamp on history and economic textbooks, stressing the superiority of American capitalism, questioning the Founding Fathers' commitment to a purely secular government, and presenting Republican political philosophies in a more positive light. The curriculum guidelines prompted many concerns, including that new textbooks would downplay slavery as the cause of the Civil War. The way in which the writers form sentences is also a problem with these new textbooks. Their decisions about how to construct sentences, about what the subject of the sentence will be, about whether the verb will be active or passive, shape the message that slavery was not all that bad. When publishers and activists demanded schools in Texas, where more than half of the public school students are Hispanic, teach more Mexican American studies, the State Board of Education responded by calling for more textbooks on the subject. So far, though, the only book submitted for approval has drawn fierce criticism. Some scholars on the subject say that the textbook Mexican American Heritage is riddled with factual errors, is missing content that promotes racism and culturally offensive stereotypes, such as Mexicans being lazy, not valuing hard work, and bringing crime and drugs into the United States. The proposal text read, and I'm quoting, "Industrialists were very driven, competitive men who were always on the clock and continually concerned about efficiency. They were used to their workers putting in a full day's work, quietly and obediently, and respecting rules, authority, and property. In contrast, Mexican laborers were not reared to put in a full day's work so vigorously. There was a cultural attitude of mañana or tomorrow when it came to high gear production. It was also a tradition to skip work on Mondays, and drinking on the job could be a problem." So, allow me to jump on my soapbox here, people. We have a two-tiered indoctrinational system where, on the lower tier, public school kids sit through nationalistic diatribes masquerading as historical fact in order to justify, if not to dupe them into becoming a noble sacrifice for the state. For instance, these kids are taught to believe that Columbus discovered the Americas and was the first person to dare to travel beyond the spooky edge of the globe. They aren't taught about his atrocities, namely the near-complete genocide of the Arawak and Carib peoples. Sadly, they don't learn about Aristophanes' experiments in Ptolemaic Egypt either. These are the experiments that accurately measured the spherical circumference of the Earth 1,500 years before Columbus was even born. Yet, in early October, when the annual protests began, they more than likely will side with the myth of Christopher Columbus, as they have been taught to do, as cognitive dissonance will reinforce them to do, even if you nailed a list of peer-reviewed facts to their forehead. On the higher tier, the upper-class students, whether they attend public school in a wealthy town or a private school in the city, run the risk of being indoctrinated in, perhaps, an equally horrifying way. They may be conditioned to believe that they deserve to have a class beneath them, one that is bred to be sacrificed for their benefit, either in a war or by cruel daily grinding of mundane existence as a duped Orwellian probe. Thank you. Ultimately, to many people, patriotism is often a euphemism for a good Christian and an excuse to embrace hawkish xenophobia. It is often celebrated in the manifestation of a person who follows the rules and traditions so well that they dare not question authority, logic, or that which they've been taught in school. And here's just a little quote from George Carlin to end it all.